me start off by wishing you all a very happy new year. It is our hope and prayer that 2021 would be better than the previous year, with the pandemic under control, everyone being vaccinated, and our lifestyle return to normal like before. Now we have completed 4 chapters in the Gita so far. To summarize what we have covered so far, the Bhagavad Gita starts off with the imminent war at Kurukshetra between the 2 mighty armies. These 2 armies, diverse in their ideologies and moral values, were arrayed against each other. And we saw that this great man of action, Arjuna, known for his valor and courage, became suddenly inept and incompetent and collapsed. It was an ideal situation for Arjuna to exhibit his talents and skills, to uphold justice, and it was an excellent opportunity for him to live up to the trust that the people had in him. He came with the intention of fulfilling his duty to the war at that time. However, at the moment of decision, something inside of him snapped and he collapsed. Thereafter, he tried to rationalize his failure to act by giving various arguments to justify, saying, what would I gain by killing my own cousins, my own teachers, and my own elders? And for what? To get the throne? In any country, the glory of the nation is dependent upon a very few leaders, great scientists, great statesmen, great poets, great sportsmen. These are the people. They are very few in number, but they bring glory to their country. The majority of the people are unremarkable and ordinary people. So Arjuna's argument was, after killing all these Maharathas, Maharathas are people who single-handedly have been able to fight 500 people at the same time. So these are the Maharathas that were arrayed against him, and he was supposed to kill them. So his argument was, after killing all these Maharathas, what kind of a nation am I going to have to rule over? It is better that I do not do this at all. Now, this is not an incident that happens in a story in Mahabharata to Arjuna. It is something that happens to each and every one of us at some time or another in our lives. When we are faced with a certain situation, we know what we are expected to do, but at that moment of decision, we falter. And then we regret for that later on, saying, why did I not act at that moment? What overcame my better judgment? And why did I not do what I was supposed to do? This is called the Arjuna disease. It's a universal disease that's present in everybody. Now, why does that happen? Lord Krishna analyzes that and gives us the answer. He says because we view the problem from a wrong perspective. As an example, one may be a very beautiful lady or a handsome man, but there are certain photographs of them which were taken at the wrong angle, which makes them look so ugly and so horrific. It is not that they are bad looking, but the angle or the lighting or something was not okay at that moment when that camera was clicked. In the same way, Arjuna looked at it purely from his selfish angle, and therefore he became incompetent and collapsed. We do the same thing most of the time. Now, fortunately for Arjuna, Lord Krishna was there to give him the good advice and revive him. For us, we have our spiritual masters, our scriptures, and we need to kind of resort to those resources to help us revive ourselves from this situation. Now then we come to chapter 2. In any book that you read, the first page or second couple of pages will have the contents of the book as to what is there in that book. In the textbook of Bhagavad Gita, there are no such contents. Chapter 2 serves the purpose of the contents. It touches upon the main ideas of all the chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. The fundamental message of the Gita, however, is that we are all expected to act diligently and to do our obligatory duties to the best of our abilities. Do not have the wrong understanding that this world is a 5-star resort hotel where we have come to relax and enjoy and indulge in sense pleasures. It is a vast hospital. This world is a vast hospital, and all of us are patients who have been admitted to this hospital because we are suffering from our vasanas. So the idea is that we get cured of these vasanas and redeem ourselves from this misery. Now the great doctor, our good Lord, in his infinite compassion and mercy, has prescribed measured amounts of joys and sorrows for each one of us. And he expects us to comply with the plan that he has laid out for us. If we refuse to follow his prescription and go about our own way, using our ego as our guide, then we would come to suffer. Once we are cured, then we are ejected out of this world once and for all. Now, in the last 18 verses of the second chapter, Lord Krishna describes the man of perfection downtown, meaning it is not a man of perfection who lives in the caves of the Himalayas, but one after the realization who comes to live amongst us and lives the same lifestyle that we live, but yet is untainted by all the temptations and desires that you and I have. That's called the man of perfection, downtown, or Sthita Prajna. and he goes into great detail as to how that enlightened master functions and how he deals with sense pleasures. Then we come to chapter 3, Karma Yoga. Now, activity is the hallmark of life. As long as we are alive, we have to act. Act we must. But what kind of activity are we supposed to be indulging in? Doing our obligatory duties to the best of our abilities, rising above the shackles of selfish desires and ego. Act responsibly, meaning when we are acting in this world, we need to be aware that there are many who look up to us, and therefore we have an added responsibility, not only to cleanse ourselves, but in our actions we set an example for others to follow. Desires and act responsibly, aware that many look up to us and will follow our example. And then the Lord talks about the Yajna spirit, where a few people get together, sink their differences, and act for the common good of others. And when they do so, that community thrives. And the Lord says, when such activity happens, sky is the limit as to what they can accomplish and achieve. That's called the Yajna spirit, when people get together and act without any selfish interest. Be aware that Brahman pervades everything and everyone, meaning that it is the Lord who was the original cause for all the effects that we see in this world. You and I and this entire universe came from that entity, and therefore everything that we see and everyone that we meet are nothing but the Lord Himself. So when we do something good for others, when we serve others, we are not serving them, but be aware that you are serving the Lord. And that is the awareness that we are supposed to have. Service to others is service to the Lord. And let not your energy, while we are acting in this world, let not your energy be dissipated in the 3 periods of time, meaning regrets of the past, anxieties about the future, and excitements of the present. These 3 dissipating factors drain our resources, so much so that we would not have any psychic energy to pursue our spiritual goal. Therefore, it is advised that we do not worry about the things that have already happened and the things that are going to happen. Instead, focus on the moment and do the best that you can at what is at hand. As our Gurudev says, let your mind be where your hands are. We are usually far away from where our hands are. When we are eating our breakfast, we are thinking about what we are supposed to do at our job that we are going to go in a short time. And then we miss out on what we are actually eating. And when we go to that work, we are thinking of what we are going to do after we leave the work and so on. Our mind is always several miles away from where we are. So bring your mind to where your hands are. Now, when Karma Yoga has been fully dealt with, Arjuna comes up with a seemingly unrelated doubt. He asked Lord Krishna, what compels man to commit a sin? Now, if we make a mistake unknowingly, that is not a sin, and there are no significant consequences for that. But when we know that something is wrong, and we still go ahead and do it anyhow for the immediate pleasure or gratification, and then we come to suffer, that is called a sin. So Arjuna's question was, what compels man to commit sin in spite of the fact that he knows that it is wrong to do it? So the Lord answers that there are two main reasons why this happens. One is lust. Lust is extreme desire, not ordinary desire, extreme desire. How does desire become extreme desire? When one gets a desire in their heart and they keep dwelling on it and keep on nurturing that desire multiplies and compounds itself and becomes so compelling and powerful that it becomes lust. And when this lust does not end up in accomplishing what that person wants, it turns into anger. And anger again is not just ordinary anger. That anger reaches a certain intensity called rage, where one loses their ability to use their wisdom and act in ways that they normally and ordinarily would not act. Mind, it is like that mind divorces itself from the intellect, hugs on to the sense organs, and walks out into the world seeking pleasure and comes to suffer. Now, we'll talk about it in a few minutes about that integration. The mind and intellect are supposed to work together, and that's called the integrated mind. Because the intellect has all the good ideas, the power of discrimination, and the wisdom. The mind is the executor of all those ideas and wisdom. However, when the mind divorces itself from the intellect, like when somebody has extreme lust or extreme anger, it is like the mind divorces itself from the intellect and hugs on to the sense organs of the body and walks out into this world seeking sense pleasures, thinking that that is going to bring everlasting happiness. But inevitably, it comes to suffer. Then we come to chapter 4. All actions are prompted by desires. Desire is the one that prompts all of us to act. And that is why in the Karma Kanda portion of the Vedas, there is extensive description of various rituals that people can perform in order to fulfill their desires. Karma Kanda portion, and they prescribe various yagnas and yagas to fulfill the desires. Now, if there is an indolent person who is totally unmotivated, he does not want to work, he does not want to do anything, but just lazily hangs around. To that person, if you want to motivate him, inject some desires into him. So if there is a guy who is just sleeping away his life, showing no desire or motivation to do anything, you go and tell him, why don't you work for 2 days a week? And with the wages that you can earn in those 2 days, you can sleep the next 5 days with a full belly. And the man thinks about it and says, that's not a bad idea. So he forces himself to work 2 days a week. And when he gets the wages, he doesn't work the next day, 5 days, eats and sleeps for the next 5 days. After some time, you go to him and say, why don't you work a third day also? That way, not only will you be able to have your bread, but you might be able to have some butter on that bread also. And he says, yeah, butter is something that I like, so maybe that's a good idea. So he works the third day. And then the fourth day, also you say, why don't you work another day so that you can have a place of your own, where you can sleep peacefully without anybody disturbing you. And then say, okay, you can have some nice furniture. Then maybe you can have a car to drive around. Like that, little by little, you put in more and more desires into him, and once he is stung by this desire, he is so motivated and energetic that nobody can stop him. He goes on working, aggrandizing, and hoarding a lot of wealth. And he keeps on working and keeps on earning, and he does not know why, but he keeps on earning more and more. Now at that time, when he is so dynamic and active in the world and accomplishing so much, you go and tell him, okay, now you have made all this money and you have all this wealth. Keep up the same tempo in your work. Keep on working the same way, but little by little take away this desire to earn money and to hoard them. Instead, you keep on working. And that kind of a man who is actively working in this world without any selfish desire is called a sattvic person. And that sattvic person can be ideally suited for exhausting his vasanas. And the more vasanas he exhausts, the less agitated his mind becomes, and his mind becomes purified enough for intense meditation. And this is the plan that was discussed in chapter 4. So, as an example, Gurudev gives in India, in the villages, people depend on the river for their daily supply of water. Now from time to time, especially during the rainy season, the water gets muddy. Or if there is a landslide somewhere, the river gets muddy. And then that water becomes not fit for consumption immediately. So the people take that water, take it home, and in a pot, they spray some potash alum. Now, potash alum is like the sugarcane candy, kalkand, but it is salty, and it is generally used as the poor man's aftershave. That potash alum, when it is sprayed on the water, forms a film on the surface of the water. And since it is a little heavier, it sinks little by little, gradually to the bottom. And while it is going down, it takes down all the dust and dirt in the water, leaving the top part of the water very clean and pure. And one can decant that water out and drink it. This method is used in the villages even today. Gurudev gives the same example that when our mind is muddied with so much desires, you add a certain desires in our mind, just like the potash alum, to bring it down. And when it brings it down, you take away the desires and keep the tempo of the work going. And thereby your mind gets pure and purified. Then we come to chapter 5. Now, Arjuna asked the question, which of the two paths, the Karma Yoga or the Sankhya Yoga? Sankhya Yoga meaning the path of contemplation. Sankhya means if a certain conclusion is made and people don't understand, you give them an argument step by step. If this is so, isn't it logical that such and such would be the case? And then they say, yeah, that is correct. So if that is so, don't you think that this would be the next stage? Yes, that sounds logical. If that were so, wouldn't the fourth step, would that be the end result? And they say, oh yeah, when you give it to me in that step-by-step fashion, I understand the logic. That is called the Sankhyan method, by giving systematic arguments to come to a rational conclusion. So Arjuna asked the question, of the two paths, the Karma Yoga or the path of contemplation, which one is the more prosperous one for everybody? As you know, even before the third chapter started, Arjuna asked the same question, which, you talk about karma and then you talk about renunciation when you talk about the Sthita Prajna. So he says to Lord Krishna, make up your mind and tell me which path you want me to follow. Now, as you see, when it comes to chapter 5, Arjuna phrases the question in a little different way. Which of the two paths are nobler? That shows that Arjuna has understood some of those discourses that Lord Krishna has been giving up to them. And the Lord answers saying, both paths, the Karma Yoga and the Sankhya Yoga, lead to the same goal. Meaning, they are two different paths, but they converge to the same goal at the end. Or one of those paths lead to the other and then they become one. It's like Freeway 5 and 405. If you want to go to San Diego, you could either take 5 or you could take 405. They both converge at one point and then they go to San Diego. In the same way, the Karma Yoga and the Sankhya Yoga go in different ways, but they reach the same point and then they lead you to the same goal of purification of your mind. But Lord Krishna says, but of those two paths, Karma Yoga is any day nobler than Sankhya Yoga. Our Gurudev says that the Lord loves the smell of sweat. He wants people to work and strive actively. And in that, if you change your attitudes while you work, then that is Karma Yoga. Which of the two paths is nobler, karma or renunciation? What do you mean by renouncing desires? Now, all along so far, the Gita is repeating the same phrase, renounce your desires. Now here in chapter 5, it addresses that issue. What do you mean by renouncing desires? Which is a very important question. Giving up everything and retiring to the Himalayas and living a life of so-called self-persecution was the idea that Arjuna had of renunciation. So Lord Krishna says that is not renunciation. Doing something external, meaning changing the clothes, cultivating a beard, putting vibhuti on your forehead does not make you a saint. This is all external changes that you are making. That does not constitute renunciation. Renunciation is something internal. In any case, giving up everything, like your family, your wife and children, giving up your job, refusing to use your talents and skills, and saying, I'm going to renounce everything and I'm going to pursue a saintly life. We have no business giving up something that is not ours, meaning anything that is external to us does not belong to us. So how can we give up something that is not ours? I have mentioned this before. If I am very pleased with the Panditji helping me with all these recording and giving these talks, and I feel so happy that I tell him, I'm going to donate this city park to you. I can donate the city park to him and he would gladly accept, but that city park will never belong to him because it never belonged to me in the first place. So how can I give something that does not belong to me? So the Lord says, you can renounce only what is yours. And what is ours? Our own vulgar thoughts, our ugly attitudes, our preoccupations with sense desires, and our wrong expectations. These are the things that we need to renounce. Those are the things that are specifically peculiar to us, and we are required to give up only those. Negative tendencies, lusts and expectations. What is expected of us when we act in this world is to give up karma palatyaga, meaning the fruits of our actions. That's what we are asked to give up, not karma tyaga. We mistake this frequently, that renunciation means giving up activities. That's not what is asked of us in the scriptures. What is required is to give up the expectations and the desire for the fruits of our actions. That's karma palatyaga. And then he comes to the phrase yuktaha. This is a very important phrase. As I explained to you earlier, yuktaha is one who has integrated his mind and intellect. When the mind and intellect do not work together, the person becomes disintegrated and his behavior becomes haphazard and erratic. We need to bring our mind and intellect to work together. The mind is the seat of emotions, and it is the main executor of the ideas and plans that the intellect makes. The intellect also is the seat of wisdom and lessons that we have learned from our past experiences. Therefore, if they work together, our actions would be perfect. But unfortunately, our mind usually works independent of the intellect, and naturally it is going to work without the benefit of the wisdom that the intellect can give. Therefore, always act with integrated mind and intellect. Failures in life are due to this lack of integration. Thank you very much, and we'll continue with you. Thank you so much.